Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week. Today we are talking about a creature that expands on the mythology of a D&D classic, the NAZTHARUNE. These creatures are the not-so-distant relatives of everyone's favorite backwards-handed fiends, the Rakshasa. As always today, we're going to be talking about the NAZTHARUNE's history as it relates to D&D, as well as its lore and ecology. Then, of course, we're going to convert it from 3rd edition D&D into 5e, so you can use it in your current ongoing campaign. But be warned, if you ever dabble in any kind of business with a NAZTHARUNE, they will always reclaim what is owed to them. But as long as you're cool with that, let's get into it. The NAZTHARUNE first appeared in D&D 3.5 as part of the Monster Manual 3. In this book, they are printed alongside the Rakshasa, which is yet another branch of the Rakshasa family tree. For those of you who may not already be aware, the Rakshasa is a fiend in Dungeons & Dragons that looks very much like a humanoid tiger. So, keeping with that theme, the NAZTHARUNE appears as a humanoid panther, and the Rakshasa looks pretty similar to the tiger-headed Rakshasa, except swapping out the orange coloration for a white one. If you assume the Rakshasa is your baseline version of this creature, it's clear those two variants were meant to sort of act as the different archetypes that might exist among their species. The Rakshasa are very much the more arcane and magic-oriented version of the creature, while the NAZTHARUNE is pretty much a Rakshasa with a lot of levels in Rogue. Now, of course, it's obviously not that simple, but I do feel like putting these variant versions of this creature in this book was pretty much the first step on the road to evolving the Rakshasa into its own proper species with lots of different variants. And this makes a lot of sense because in the source material, not the D&D source material, but the mythological source material where the Rakshasa comes from, they are an extremely varied creature. In Hindu mythology, they are something akin to an evil spirit that exists to basically cause problems and eat people. But there is also precedent for some Rakshasa that are more good aligned and fight alongside the forces of justice, so much like many of the other creatures yoinked from various mythologies around the world and put into D&D, their Dungeons & Dragons counterpart isn't exactly representative of the source material. In fact, even their signature trait, the Raksasa's backwards hands, were invented by Dungeons & Dragons as a way to kind of punch the creature up a little bit. I always assumed that was something from the original mythology, but in doing research for this video, I learned that that actually was just completely invented. The first instance of that design showing up was actually in an old Dragon magazine issue, so I guess people just liked it, and it stuck. But back to the NAZTHARUNE. Much like the Rakshasa, nobody really knows their true origin. It's theorized by many scholars in the worlds of D&D that they are demons or maybe even devils that have found a way to escape the lower planes by transferring their essence into the body of a wild animal on the material plane. Hence why they look sort of like big cats. I mean, if you're a demon and you have to anthropomorphize yourself into the body of a living animal on the material plane, a tiger or panther isn't a bad choice. The NAZTHARUNE also shares in common with its Rakshasa cousins an absolute enmity for other creatures. Like many extraplanar entities, they think very highly of themselves and will happily tell you to your face how superior to you they truly are. However, in the case of the NAZTHARUNE, their pride comes second only to the almighty gold piece. Where typical Rakshasas are absolutely unwilling to be a part of any operation unless they're the one in charge, the NAZTHARUNE is much more mercenary-minded. As exceptionally talented assassins, they will gladly work for the highest bidder, even if they quietly think to themselves to be above them. For this reason, you will find NAZTHARUNEs all over the multiverse, basically anywhere there are rich and powerful people willing to pay them. To them, a job is just a job. Makes it a lot easier when you don't like your boss if you know back home there's a massive pile of gold waiting for you. This occasionally leads to some snide remarks from the other Rakshasa who might be around, but I have to imagine the NAZTHARUNE's response is often to just ignore it and go buy themselves another Gucci watch. But aside from their abilities to work with others and the fact that they often put business before their own pride, their culture is very similar to that of the Rakshasa for obvious reasons. The only other major appearance made by this creature in 4th edition goes as far as to have them lumped in with the Rakshasa entirely. In the 4E base monster manual, they try to do that thing that 4E love to do, where they give you like 6 different versions of the same monster, and rather than try to differentiate the NAZTHARUNE from the rest of the Rakshasa, the NAZTHARUNE simply appears as a Rakshasa assassin, and it only reads as a separate creature because I know what the artwork looks like, and there is one illustration of them in the book. But what really makes this monster special is the way that they do combat and their lethal kit of abilities. So let's move on and talk about how this killer for hire makes themselves an honest living. When it comes to combat with a NAZTHARUNE, you better hope to the gods that you see it before it sees you. Which honestly, not very likely. The NAZTHARUNE is kitted out with a lot of stuff that you might typically see a rogue make use of in 5th edition. They have 2 short swords and a short bow to deal damage with, and of course they have sneak attack, which allows them once per round to get off an additional 6d6 damage against any of their opponents, which any good rogue will tell you is where all the juice is. In order to get that extra sneak attack damage in battle though, it has to be attacking a creature with advantage, or one of its allies has to be within 5 feet of the target, and the NAZTHARUNE can't have disadvantage. Pretty much the same way it works for players that want to sneak attack with their rogues, and in the NAZTHARUNE's case, in order to do that, it's going to be stealthy as... It's got a few different tricks to help with this, but maybe one of the strongest is a trait it has called One with the Dark. This trait not only enables it to take the hide action as a bonus action, but also it allows it to try and hide in plain sight as long as it's in an area of dim light or darkness. So, if you do end up fighting a NAZTHARUNE, even if you survive long enough to not just get straight up assassinated by it, if you're someplace dark, there's a really good chance it's going to just effectively disappear from your sight right in front of you. Which seems kind of bad. And this guy can also teleport, kind of. Using its Shadow Step ability, something that shows up by the exact name in the Way of Shadow Monk subclass for 5th edition, the NAZTHARUNE can literally teleport between 2 locations within 20 feet of each other as long as it can see the other spot and both locations are in dim light or darkness. If you've ever had a Shadow Monk in one of your games, either as a fellow player or as a player you're DMing for, you know how powerful this ability can be. The one thing that I find really sets this CR10 beastie apart from all of its other roguish contemporaries is the fact that it also has psychic powers. It's basically just under a permanent casting of Detect Thoughts that allows it to read the surface level thoughts of any sentient creature within 30 feet of it. It can also try to probe deeper to root any more intel out of that target's mind. However, if it does so, the subject not only becomes aware that someone is rooting around in their mind, but they can try to fight it off with a successful DC 15 intelligence saving throw. All in all, however, I do find that this is just such an exceptionally useful ability, because not only does it allow the NAZTHARUNE to interrogate any potential targets with an extra level of spice, it also allows them to know the exact location of anything with an intelligence score of 3 or higher that is within 30 feet of them. Without the use of magic, it's going to be nearly impossible to sneak up on or hide from one of these things if you're nearby. And even if you do manage to slip away for a brief moment, it knows what you're thinking. Now, I did make one minor change to this stat block, and that was the inclusion of poison. I felt like it was appropriate to have the NAZTHARUNE's short bow fire poison-tipped arrows, because that just seems like something an assassin would do. If you find that to be a little bit too punishing, or you just don't like it, feel free to simply just ignore the section about poison on the short bow attack. But I mean, what kind of fiendish interplanar assassin inhabiting the body of a panther wouldn't use poison-tipped arrows? Which decidedly brings us to our next point. Now that we know how the NAZTHARUNE deals death, let's talk about why the NAZTHARUNE deals death. It's money. It's always money. The NAZTHARUNE are exceptionally avaricious and will stop at nothing to secure for themselves a massive pile of gold. What they actually use that gold for is not explained in the source material, which is very odd because usually that's the kind of thing that you put in a monster entry. But following the lead of the Rakshasa, it's likely that they amass wealth in order to spread their sphere of influence. They might have no qualms about taking orders or working under mortals to secure a bag, but at the end of the day, if they are given a chance to take the lead and make it lucrative, that's what they're going to be happiest doing. Setting up a proper assassin's guild is pricey, you gotta find those funds somewhere. Also, the NAZTHARUNE do still enjoy that decadent extra lifestyle enjoyed by most Rakshasa. Except where often to a Rakshasa, the reason why they live so decadently is in order to assert their wealth and dominance over those who are around them. But to a NAZTHARUNE, it's simply the reward at the end of the tunnel for all their hard work. You could buy a lot of catnip for 1,000 gold. But in terms of where you actually want to place this creature in your D&D campaign, you have a few different options. The obvious choice is to have them act in place of a thief or assassin. If the players have made a powerful enemy, it feels a bit more intense to send a NAZTHARUNE after them rather than just a group of human killers. Or maybe you even set the NAZTHARUNE up as a villain working on behalf of your big bad. If, say, there's a person of power who wants the party dead, perhaps they hire an assassin's guild that is led by a NAZTHARUNE. So at first, it's all just the novice assassins coming after them. But once the party proves to be a real threat, then they garner the attention of the NAZTHARUNE guild boss, who comes after them themselves. And that's kind of the cool thing about Rakshasas. Because they aren't native to the material plane, if your party manages to actually kill this thing, it's not really dead. Instead, they are reborn in the depths of the lower planes wherever they originate from, in a process that is often described in many different D&D books as being exceptionally painful. It can sometimes take years for the spirit to fully reform, and I'm not talking just a couple years, like a lot of years. And when that spirit does finally reform and manages to make its way back to the material plane, the one thing on its mind is often revenge. I mean, I'd be pretty mad too, to be honest. So maybe this NAZTHARUNE comes back to the material plane and finds 250 years have passed. That sucks for them because their enemy is now long dead. However, they might have ancestors. Perhaps one of your party members is being stalked by a NAZTHARUNE not because of anything they did, but because their great-great-great-great-grandfather killed this guy, and now they're out for revenge on the bloodline. This could be an interesting twist on a murder mystery plot where the victim was slain in a revenge killing by a NAZTHARUNE. It might seem like a totally random act until the party traces back the victim's lineage and finds that they were related to a great hero of some kind who was famous for slaying demons or something. It's also possible that the NAZTHARUNE is using their shape change ability to blend in as a member of society. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't really mention that when we were talking about its abilities, but the NAZTHARUNE absolutely has the ability to change its appearance. This isn't a full-on polymorph effect or anything like that. In fact, it functions very similarly to the way the Alter Self spell works. Essentially, it means that as long as you're looking at a medium humanoid creature, you might actually be looking at a NAZTHARUNE. That opens up a lot of doors for intrigue, in my opinion. When you're dealing with a face-swapping creature that could be literally anyone, especially one that can read minds, the potential for schemes goes off the rails. Plus, this ability is bound to come in handy when the NAZTHARUNE is trying to hunt someone down and assassinate them. From strictly a character perspective, if you've ever felt like spicing up the edgy rogue with two dead parents trope, maybe the one who raised them after their parents' untimely demise was a NAZTHARUNE who taught them all the tricks of the trade along the way. Having a demon cat dad sounds like a sweet alternative to your run-of-the-mill orphanage. In any case, I hope you like this creature, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons who make this show possible, and a special shout out to our Patron of the Week! This week's randomly selected patron is Dr. Lazarus. Thank you so much for supporting my content and bringing this channel back from the dead. It means a lot. And thank you for watching. As always, the 5th edition conversions of these monsters can be found down in the description below in the form of a Google document, or if you're over on the Patreon page, you'll find the Patreon style Dungeon Dad patron stat block, whatever we're calling it these days, which is basically just a high-res PDF with all the same information, but a bit fancier presentation, and hey, helps support the channel and helps support the content I'm making here. Also, if there's a monster you'd like to see show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week, definitely let me know in the comments down below, or jump on over to the Dungeon Dad Discord, where we have a monster suggestions chat where you can leave your suggestion there, and in either case, it will be added to the list, and who knows, you might just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week. But yeah, that's all I got for you this week. I apologize this episode was a little bit on the shorter side, but I wanted to still get something out this week. I'm currently at Gen Con, so I mean, if you're watching this on the con floor or you just happen to be at Gen Con as well, definitely come say hi, tell me what your favorite monster is. Otherwise, I'll be back next week with more of your regularly scheduled programming, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.